Enjoy a seat at the table and good company, where great conversations and meaningful discussions happen.
Welcome to And Good Company. I'm Sarah Fiedelholtz, a conversationalist. We all know that what really makes a dinner party great isn't the food. It's the people seated around the table engaging in lively discussions and debates. We wanted to create an opportunity and a place where we could have and capture meaningful and interesting conversations. And I am pleased to have with me at this table Mark Hagar, who is the managing member of RAIN, which is the Regional Angel Investment Network.
Yes.
Welcome.
Hi. Thank you.
So, why don't we start with a little bit about your background? One of the things that in my due diligence here that I found very interesting was that you didn't go to college until you were 28.
Yes, I was a non-traditional student. I've had this kind of the good fortune in my life to do a lot of different things, but I was actively employed in a job that I really enjoyed, and I didn't really see any particular reason to go to college until I just decided that I wanted to, and chipped away at it. And I remember very explicitly telling my wife that I really will probably just get an associate's degree. I just want the experience, and I want to be able to say that I've done it and to have a diploma to hang on the wall. And I started down that path, and what I realized pretty quickly is I really like school. And at 54, I have spent every semester since the age of 28 either a teacher or a student in a university.
And you got your doctorate.
And I have recently completed my doctoral work, yes.
And so the majority of your work is really looking at working with entrepreneurs and startups, and then also with companies that are in financial distress.
Yes, the nature of my research is directly related to small businesses in financial distress. And by definition, that's a company that has had a history of success that finds themselves into some kind of financial problem, and it takes some kind of intervention to prevent them from failing.
Right. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. But what I want to also talk to you about is this whole idea with entrepreneurs and you being a teacher. And do you think that you can teach someone to be an entrepreneur? You know, the whole nature versus nurture.
Right.
Do you think that you can teach someone those skills?
The skills, yes. The motivation, no. Right. I think that helping people down the pathway is very valuable. I think you can, there is this entrepreneurial journey that people go on. And I think at best, we can help them transition a little faster through some of those things. And that includes, if they're ultimately going to fail, we can help them get there faster so they don't, spend 3 years of their lives in a pursuit that bears no fruit. So I do think that we can help them along the way. In terms of just taking an individual who doesn't have the motivation or can't maintain the motivation and try to turn them into an entrepreneur, I just don't believe in it. No, and I think there's a lot of misguided efforts towards that right now, universally. Right, it's all over literally all over the world, and we see programs and efforts to create entrepreneurs, and I just don't think you can do that.
Well, you said that. You can't force someone to be successful.
Right.
I mean, you can help them with the tools, but
yes.
I think that having an ability to be comfortable with risk, or being able to have to sort of put your ego aside and be disciplined, and I think there are those soft skills that I don't believe you can teach. I mean, I think you can teach someone accounting principles, but what it really takes to be an entrepreneur, I think it's hard. I go more on the nature versus nurture. I think the nurture can bring out what's in your nature.
I think what the analogy I like to use is that we are spending an awful lot of resources trying to make the path of entrepreneurship easier, instead of preparing that individual for the rough journey ahead. Right. And you can only do that to a certain extent. And sooner or later, they have to take those steps.
And what I was surprised with is that in reality, the number of entrepreneurs that we have starting businesses has been on the decline.
Yes.
And the average age when someone really becomes an entrepreneur is usually in their 40s. I mean, we all hear about these tech
Yes.
newbies, and because of the sense of technology. But in reality, because I think that even when you look at even companies, people that have worked at Amazon or Google, a lot of times how they become an entrepreneur is because they see something either in the big company that wasn't being done, or they see a part of the business that isn't in the wheelhouse
Right.
of a big company, and then they go off and sort of spin it out. But I don't think people really realize that most entrepreneurs, and really it's when they're in their 40s.
Right. And I think the celebrity portion of entrepreneurship, and that's part of the excitement, and as you said, it's the younger generation and
Right.
pursuit towards technology. That all makes news because it's disruptive, and that's a disruptive entrepreneurship is a type of entrepreneurship, but it's not how most people enter entrepreneurship, and it's not how most people draw benefit from entrepreneurship, right?
Right.
Most of it has much more to do with seeing small opportunities in a marketplace and going out and pursuing those markets, and it's really not about disrupting. It's just about capitalizing on the opportunities that
Right.
are out there.
Or seeing, like I said, like in a lot of cases, it's just because for a large company, like I was talking to a software developer and I needed something done, and he's like, that's just too small of a project for
Right.
us. But he said that I was the second person in the week that came to him. So I was like, well, maybe this could be a division for
Right.
you. And he was like, no, it just wouldn't make sense for him. But then you sort of think, well, maybe one of his employees who has a programming background, that's where they would see the opportunity.
Right.
And you talked a lot about that you learned your skills from your dad around the dinner table, who was a barber. So what business skills do you think you got from your dad?
I think most people who grow up in households where there's entrepreneurship, I always refer to it as my kitchen table MBA. Right? And the things that you learn are those grounded, fundamental things that it's not about disrupting. It really is about taking care of customers, right? So my dad owned a small barber shop, and it was always about taking care of people, being efficient, meeting their expectations, talking to customers in a meaningful way, making yourself available. This notion of staying an extra 20 minutes because somebody had to get
Right.
off work and come in. You of course you help those people. Everyone benefits from that, right?
Mm-hmm.
The good feelings that are the result of that, and the service,
Sure.
and he obviously got paid for that. And I think those are the types of conversation. And then there was, some of the things that stick with me today. My dad was a big anti-government person, so he complained about government and taxes. And as you, start to realize some of these costs yourself, you start to realize why he complained
Right.
the way he did.
Sure.
And I don't necessarily share all of his, political viewpoints, but certainly I can understand. I always say if everybody in the world had to pay self-employment taxes, there would be rioting in the streets, right?
Right.
And for those of us who have to do it, it's all part of what we sign up for. As
Right.
we say, we wanted to play the game, so we shouldn't complain too much about the rules.
But like when you have to pay for your own health insurance, I think we can complain about the rules.
Right. And I think those are some of the things that stick
Right.
with me. The lessons that came out of that. It's just a reminder that he was right.
But,
This is something else he was right about.
You mentioned something that I thought was so poignant that sort of represented to me that understanding how sociological shifts and things happen and how to look at their business. Because your dad
Yes.
was saying that, you were saying that when he started, it was when men really had very short hair.
That's right. In the 50s and 60s, and men and their sons would come to the barbershop at least once every other week,
Right.
oftentimes once a week, especially if it was somebody involved in the banking industry or business people, and that changed over time, right? And then got into the 60s, and long hair became very popular, and all of a sudden those customers were coming every couple of months, right? And
Right.
so, I remember those conversations as well.
And I think that
It's
to
really-
me is really poignant in terms of really as not understanding your business. And
Yes.
understanding your business is not just about the numbers. It's about
no.
looking at trends and changes in demographics and changes in, people's behavior and,
Right.
all those kinds of things that I think it's people forget that part of
Right.
it. And I thought that he was very poignant.
Right. He was, yeah. And I think that notion of understanding your customers,
Right.
understanding your competitive environment, are keys to
Right.
to successful employment. Not just knowing your own numbers, but it is that market awareness. And
Right.
that's one of the distinctions between companies that recover quickly when they get into distress. Right.
Right.
So one of the fields I work in. So.
And I always, when I started I started in magazines, and I started in the late 80s, and they said, you had to choose if you were on the editorial side or the business side. And I was like, why? Because I always believe whatever business I'm in, even if I don't own it, I want to understand how that business makes money and what it values, because that tells me as an employee what I need to do to become valuable, or to see what I need to understand the industry, so that if there is a change or something, that then also I can be aware of that, for either to do my job better or to look for other explore opportunities. And but one of the things that I thought was really interesting, and we're going to go a little bit off to a little bit more of a philosophical question.
Oh, good.
But you talked about this idea of when you were working in printing, and
Yes.
And you were sort of you had a partner, and you saw his life, and he was very content and Larry, very content and successful. And when you started to realize that he was 20 years older than you.
Yeah, approximately, yes. And I think that goes back to the conversation about college. And I worked in a printing environment. And again, it was a job that I thoroughly enjoyed. We operated a very large press, two operators on the press. And my partner was a man named Larry, and he was at least 20 years older than me. Had a very nice life for himself.
Right.
He and his wife, and he had two, at that time, teenage children. And they lived in the house that they bought when they got married, and had a very contented life. And I just could see that was my future if I stayed in the company that I was in. And that was one of the motivations for me to go back to school. And just to project that out, again, I enjoyed what I was doing.
Right.
But when you can look across the room and say, I'll be doing exactly the same thing, just like he was 20 years prior, and that just wasn't what I wanted for my life. And I think, having that long thought process of every day being able to see that and think, is that what I want for my life? The element of the contentment and the happiness that he was one of the most joy-filled people I ever met.
Right.
And that was very appealing. But the work wasn't interesting to me at that level. Right.
So you said you asked yourself this question: is this going to be enough?
Right.
Like, are you going to be satisfied? And I think that is one of the motivators of entrepreneurs, because it's never enough. You're always looking for what's next, how to grow, what's different, where else you can go. So have you asked that question of yourself in other periods of your life since then?
I think I ask that question of myself all the time now. I'm in a life transition right now. My kids have gone on to college, and my wife and I are home. And so it's her and I and the dog. And we're looking at what's retirement going to look like. Honestly, I've done the turnaround work for 20 years now, and I do start to question, like, do I have another turnaround in me? There are very stressful periods of time. And I think I'm always looking at, is it enough? But I think I'm looking at it from the different perspective of, before it was, is it enough and do I need more? And now I look at it and say, is it enough to the extent where I can actually start doing less?
Right. And you've done, all kinds of things.
Right.
You wrote a book about direct mail, you got your doctorate, you did a podcast about your business. So you've done a lot, and also you focused on academia. So academia is also a good place to be if you're going to retire.
It's wonderful, and I'm teaching classes now, and it's good that having just completed I took a leave of absence when I started working on my doctorate, and I've just gone back recently, and all the positive things about it are coming back, a few of the negative as well. You start to remember those things from 5 years ago. But I love academics, and to the extent that I'll be able to continue researching, I think is especially important to me now that I have kind of cut my teeth in the research environment for a few years. I really enjoy it.
And we're going to talk about your research in a minute. But so let's talk about RAIN.
Yes.
So it's the Regional Angel Investment Network.
Yes.
So you do equity investments in startups, distressed businesses, and what you called special situations.
Yeah.
So explain what is RAIN? So is RAIN like is it a group of individuals who all sort of put their money in a pot, or how does it work, and what kinds of projects and things have you done?
Sure. So RAIN is it's a loosely affiliated group of investors. We do not have a fund, so we don't put our money in a pot, and there's a million practical reasons for that. There's 2 million legal reasons for it. But at the end of the day, it's just not what we wanted. We started down that path and decided it really wasn't the way we wanted to do it. But rather than just, scratch the whole thing and do nothing, we said, look, there's another way around this. We don't have to have a fund. We don't have to have, all the oversight required of a fund. We don't have to make people uncomfortable with where their money goes once they put it in a fund. And so we just looked at this from a different perspective, and we operate as a loose group of equity investors, accredited investors, and I serve as managing member. I serve as the point person, so I typically find the deals. I do the initial vetting of the deals, and then I bring it to the group and ask anybody that wants to participate. As we go forward, we're going to start to pursue this. If you're interested, let me know. And they make individual decisions about whether they want to be involved and to what degree they want to be involved. And we've acquired businesses that way for about 15 years now.
Right. So let's take a step back a second,
Sure.
And let's talk about the idea of equity investments versus the trend a little bit now for more philanthropic and impact investing.
Well, I don't think there's a distinction necessarily there. Right? So in either case, equity simply means you take ownership of the business rather than do it through a loan or some other means, right? And so it's really just a matter of saying, I exchange money for ownership. And the degree of ownership can change by the deal, and of course valuations change on every deal. But that's the kind of the definition of equity. For
I thought it would be the difference on return, when the expectation is for when the investor would get their money and then some. Because most equity, you're talking 2 to 3 years, where impact
or 10 to 15.
Well, but I would thought with impact investing, they would know it's more for a long-term investment, and they're not going to see it for.
And so, impact investing doesn't necessarily mean equity. It often does, and there's always a social aspect to it, right? And for some people, that's very important. I think our organization, and for me personally, investment has always been a way to. It's about income, right? And it's about building value and hopefully building some wealth over time. The charitable things that I choose to do, I do outside of my business.
Right. Well, that's the learn, earn, return.
Right. And that's just, I've always been more comfortable. I think it's really difficult for businesses in general to try to do more than one thing, right? And they're designed to generate profit. I mean, this sort of by definition, this is what we're doing, trying to create value.
Right.
And to say, well, we're going to create value and at the same time we're going to do something else, it's certainly possible. But as an investor, selfishly, I'm more interested in the return side of this and go be charitable on your own time with your own money. And your
like impact investing is a good, you don't think that that's a good way for people, they're not looking necessarily for the same returns.
Right.
So I guess it's investing, but I guess it is more of a philanthropic.
Yeah, I think they're trying to straddle that, and I just, it's fine for some people. It's just not the model that I've used. And
I thought also what you talked about was what you have learned about yourself and how you go about investing. And when you take equity, and you used to say that it's that 51-49%, and you wanted to really be involved every day, and you wanted to know, and so then it became that you really weren't just an investor, you were really running the entities.
Yeah, my model has changed over the years, and I think that initially, because you're kind of playing follow the leader, and you see what other people do, and you see that you start to believe that this is the right way to do it. Even though you start to learn over time, there are other ways, and none of them may be right because it's individualized, right? And so it had to be what was right for me. And I gave up on that fight a long time ago, and I've kind of gone to one extreme or the other. And so now it is, I'll take 70% of a company or more, or I'll take 10% of a company or less, but I won't be in the middle.
Okay.
And with the full perception being something less than 10% is a passive investment. I'm here as an advisor. Call me if I can help, but I'm never going to call you. I'm not going to walk through and tell you what you should be doing. 70% is the exact opposite.
Right.
I am the control person, and this is going to operate the way I tell it. The way I decide it's going to operate.
Is that more because of when you do the 70% when you're working with a distressed company? Because one of the things that you say is. You sort of create a plan for somebody and you tell them what they need to do. And you said that, when your company is in trouble, especially if it's someone who at one time was successful and for whatever reason, and then you outline this plan and you say, look, it's not going to be easy, it's going to be uncomfortable, but here are out of the 4 tough decisions, pick the one that you think is going to be less painful, right? And they don't do it. And so you say you have this, what's wrong with that person? So is that why you will take more of the 70% because of the fact that you'll see how to get that distressed company back on track?
Yes. Yeah. In simple terms, yes. That's, the thing that you talk about, the phenomena that you're describing is my research, and I know we're going to get to that, but and it's common across the industry.
But don't you think it's common across people in general?
I do. I think
they don't want advice?
I think that any professional has to deal with it in some way, right? So I think attorneys and I say doctors deal with it because if they didn't, no one would ever smoke, right? And so, I look at it within the context of my business, right? And the businesses that I deal with, and it's frustrating as a consultant to come into an environment and we look over the situation and say, well, okay, here's the pathway by which we can get this back on track, and you can keep your house, right? Because small business owners and personal guarantees and all those things.
Nope.
Well, you can't not do it in small business, right? And so it's frustrating though from a professional standpoint to say, look, I can tell you what you need to do. And again, that's an area of my business that has evolved as well, because early on in my business, I would take on more of that responsibility for them. And that doesn't work in the long run. So if you're looking at a situation where you have to downsize 20% of the staff, early in my career, I would do that work for them. Say, I'll do the face-to-face and I'll do it. And what I discovered is over time that didn't provide closure to that business owner, and left open wounds for them not to do that themselves, right? I mean, kind of mice and men. It's like, shoot your own dog. And so I've changed that philosophy. But it still makes it difficult because now I say, look, you have to do this. And then they, sometimes I'll coach them through it and I'll sit in with them and do whatever I can. But
do you think also, so your research for your doctorate was on sort of the psychological kind of reaction that people have to maybe not doing the things that are hard, and it's not procrastination, because that's...
Portion of it is.
Oh, it is.
A portion of it is, sure.
Because procrastination is typically it's intellectually you know what you need to do, but emotionally you know it's going to be very painful.
Exactly.
So, so in your research, when you look at these companies, what do you think it is? Is it, one of the things I was thinking is I was wondering if some of the distressed companies that you work with are actually ones that are family owned and they're going from one generation to the next, because the majority of them don't make it to the third generation. And so even, you look at that show Succession, which is crazy, but the idea that of who is going to succeed, and even when the father is such the leader of the business and then the children try to take over. So I was wondering, are there more typical situations or scenarios where you see a distressed company, or things that impact the psychological of not being able to make the decisions?
Well, when we talk about the specifics of my research, and it's a very narrow, right, in the doctoral world, as you're supposed to do. What I looked at very specifically is why owners do just what we talked about, why they hire someone like me and then reject the advice. And I did it all the research was done from the perspective of people who do what I do, which made it unique in itself, because normally this would be done via case study, right? So we use a different methodology.
Are there a lot of people who do what you do? And you're certified,
I'm a certified turnaround professional. We number in the hundreds across the world. I think there's maybe 2 of us in Indiana.
And And the work that you did is actually, though, it was for a university that's in the UK, right?
Yes, I study in England.
Yeah. So that must have been
Cranfield University, just about an hour outside of London.
Okay.
Yes. Anyway, so the research that I did was specific from the consultant's perspective. What are the things that prevent this? And the methodology, just kind of the results that we came up with have to do with this inability to build rapport. And of course, from a consultant's perspective, it's the business owner's fault that they can't build rapport. But we know that rapport fails to develop over time.
You're saying really, rapport with you as the consultant?
Yes.
Okay.
The consultant and the business owner being unable to create some kind of a bridge where they can work together effectively.
Do you think that's more also missed expectations?
Well, what we found is that it is related to, there are non-financial objectives. Business owners don't just get into business for money, and business owners who want to stay in business aren't purely motivated by money, right? There is this, the perception of being successful that they're concerned with. There's a lifestyle that they developed, and well,
nobody wants to fail.
And no one wants to fail, right? Nobody, the stigma of failure that they carry, right? And that conflicts directly with the purely financial objectives of a consultant. I'm here to fix your broken business. Right. And so that's one area of it. There's this self-efficacy that we already talked about, I think, a little bit, that these owners have this need to define and develop their own solutions to these problems. And part of that is just the defiance of, they've run their business for 15 years, I've been in there 15 minutes, and I'm giving them solutions, and they don't like that, right?
But then you wonder, well, then why did they hire you?
Well, that's like a universal question, but that degree of self-efficacy, and the tendency then is for them to only develop solutions that they know they can accomplish. And as a consultant, I come in and say, that's not where we need to be looking. We need to be looking over here, beyond their comfort zone.
Well, that's also the issue of people feeling that they do things they can have control over.
Exactly.
They're not necessarily rationale. Like with the whole COVID, people hoarding toilet paper. There was no reason, but people couldn't control what was happening, so they can only they take on and focus, like with laser-like vision, on what they can control. Right. So. So why do you, what do you, with all these, I mean, because when large companies hire consultants, I mean, and they're brought in, I mean, it's sort of the buy-in has to be at the top.
Right.
So, and they get it. And sometimes it's the minions who don't want to work with the consultant. But in the terms of with the small business owners or mid-sized companies that you work with, why do you enjoy it if it's you're constantly pushing that rock up the hill?
It's the Rubik's Cube. It's the the crossword puzzle that no one else can solve, and that's what it is. It's purely. I tell people all the time, there is no. Nobody brags about hiring me.
Right. Well,
and they probably shouldn't.
But you don't even talk about your clients.
No, I've never in my 20 years of doing this have I ever mentioned the name of a client.
Right.
And they don't talk about me either. And very rarely do I have a client who, tells me they appreciate it. I don't get Christmas cards from people. Right. Those things don't happen. Right. In part because, the most common thing they usually say is, well, I could have done what you did. And I say, yes, but, you didn't, and I got you there, and that's fine. At the end of the day, though, it is truly, and maybe it's a lot of ego, right? But I know that I can resolve this issue, and I get personal satisfaction from helping save jobs. I mean, I've had 50 plus engagements in the time that I've done this. It represents thousands of jobs that would have otherwise been lost. Right. You're talking about business owners who didn't lose their homes. Right. They may have had other losses along the way, but and it just, I keep it's all in a closet. I open my closet and I stack them up, and
But that's more for your personal satisfaction,
absolutely.
But
certainly.
So, but let's look at let's unpack out of the closet some of the issues with small businesses, and especially with this issue of in Fort Wayne or really other than Chicago. Okay, the lack of VC investment, and why can't we attract Wall Street dollars? And because we have, some incredible, and some of the companies you work on are manufacturing, and you work on orthopedic supply, and so why can't we get Wall Street dollars here?
Well, I'm not sure that we can't.
Okay, or we
for
haven't.
starters.
Maybe I should.
I think we rarely do.
Right.
So I think you look at this pragmatically, and Wall Street dollars in particular, any large fund type money, it's absolutely non-emotional money. It's going to go where it produces a return.
Right.
Right. And so when somebody here says we can't get Wall Street money to invest in it, that tells you that it's a bad financial investment. Right, because
that's what
we sit in Fort Wayne and say, oh, but it's such an important thing, or it's such a good, and there's so much potential, and we have this emotional tie to it,
right.
then we think other people should invest in it. And when somebody who makes all their decisions purely on the financial return looks
right.
at it and says, no, it's not a good deal, that tells you that it's not a good deal. And that's where we have to go back then and either try to make it a better deal, or we just have to capitalize on that emotional tie and say only people with emotional strings to this thing are going to be the ones who are willing to invest in it.
And which is sort of why a lot of investors, like in each community, if you look at the success of cities that have been reinvigorated or reinvented themselves, usually there is some very prominent philanthropic individuals who have been successful there, who then create foundations or funds from that standpoint. But I think this idea of it's not a good investment and that a lot of it is not, there's no emotion to it, is the idea of what's happening now with media, and that we're almost up to 50% of media companies owned by hedge funds.
Right.
And sort of this, yes, on the local level, we all feel emotional that we need to know what's going on the Friday night, football fields, and we want the local content, but, they're buying them up and looking and saying, if this is going to be anything like a reasonable business, we're going to have to do all these things. But then but the interesting thing is all the reaction to hedge funds owning these media companies.
Well, you certainly would be able to speak to this better than I can, but my observation, my son works in media.
Okay.
And so my observation of media has been that it has been a game of follow the leader, and none of them know really what they're doing, and none of them are they're not demonstrating success on a level.
Right.
And so I think it's just an idea that one hedge fund decided to get into media and others said we should do it as well.
Right.
So they're all rushing out and buying companies up, and
I don't necessarily think they have a solution of what. No, but they just are thinking that either they'll sell it for parts, or there is. I mean, that's the $1 million mystery question.
Sure.
But so although, like with hedge funds or certain VC money, it is. They take the emotion out of it.
Sure.
Okay, but when you're doing your own investment and you've developed your investment thesis, which I want to ask you about, but you talked about that if you had to vet the jockey versus vetting the horse, you say vet the jockey.
Yes.
So you believe, though, that when you're looking at for an investment, you're looking at the founder or the people.
Yes. Well, you have to believe they can do what they say they're going to do. And without that, it doesn't matter how good the idea might be. And I think, one of the things that I learned in the research that I did before I started doing startup investing, and
and develop your investment thesis.
And help develop that thesis, yes, was that it's easy to be wrong on the idea, right? And so you have a better chance of being right if you can believe in the person.
Right, because ideas are a dime a dozen.
Ideas are a dime a dozen.
And it's the execution.
And when you think about, one of my friends in the investment world likes to talk about the fact that in the same week he said no to Airbnb and Uber.
Right.
Because he said what ridiculous ideas they are, right? And they are ridiculous ideas when you think about it. I'm going to drive around and pick up random people and put them in my back seat, take them where they want to go. And so it's so much better just to look at the individuals and say, can they execute to the extent that they say? And some of that goes back to our earlier discussion about market awareness and customer awareness, right? And somebody who says, I can do this because I know I can sell it once to somebody I'm not related to.
Right.
And there are, 1 million people or 10 million people or 20 million people just like that.
Right.
And that is my potential market, and I know I can reach those people, right?
Well, I think that when you partly, like when you look at a company like Uber or Airbnb, I think that you have to look at how technology has allowed things to change and happen that would have never been able to happen without it.
Right.
So there is that kind of thought of looking at technology and investing there. Or you could do the Warren Buffett model, which is he only invests in companies and products that he understands.
Right.
And so, I think that's why he works with Bill Gates. So, I mean, you have to develop your own investment, what you call thesis.
Right.
And so let's talk about how you came about, and so this was like a separate doctorate degree you got, and you did it by hitting the road with Paul Singh. So,
I did.
So tell me a little bit about Paul and then what that experience and how you brought that back to Fort Wayne.
Yeah, and so I had this background of working in and buying distressed companies, and that's where I was very comfortable. In 2015, I think Paul came through Fort Wayne. He had something called Tech Tour, and he was going to smaller communities where there isn't a lot of venture capital, and he was taking office hours with people and listening to their pitches and trying to find opportunities to invest. And along the way, he also just generally pontificated about things, right? And if Paul were here, he would laugh at that because he's a very generous person, very generous with his knowledge and
his time.
Incredibly. No. Interestingly enough,
I'll say, he let you go
I'll
with
say it
him.
right to the camera. He is selfish with his time. He is generous with his knowledge. So, but the way this came about was I had just sold a company. And I had met him when he was here, and shortly after I called him and I said, would you give me an hour of your time? I'm thinking about really ramping up my startup investment, and I really want to understand how you vet deals and how you look at things. And he said, I'm happy to give you some time, but I would much rather why don't you just come with me? He said, you just sold your company. You have nothing going on. Is exactly what he said to me. You've got nothing going on.
Yeah, right.
He said, just come on. And so I did. I went to about 20 cities with him. He was covering a city every other week at that time, and I think he's been to a couple hundred now after having been on the road all those times. And incredibly knowledgeable, incredibly nice and kind individual. So that's what I did. I went to different cities with him. I sat in. Sometimes the host would call me into the conversation, and I would give a little presentation about some of the stuff that I've done. But the real heart of it was these 20 to 40 pitches that we would listen to, and we would sit at the table and people would give their pitch. And Paul was, again, talking about generous, that's when he would give them this full feedback. It was not a one-way, here's my pitch and I'm just going to say yes or no. I mean, he's somebody who deeply cares about people's success. He wants everyone to succeed.
Well, you said that he said, I want you to win.
I want you to win. I heard that, we listened to 200 pitches. I heard that 220 times probably.
And that's what I always say. In my work, I want you to be successful. Because if you're successful, then that will come back, that I will be successful.
Yeah,
and that's coming from this idea of abundance, not that there's a limited amount of success.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And I think, Paul looked at it completely unselfishly. Whether he put money in a deal or not, that wasn't the point. His point was always, I want you to be successful. And some of that came, it was a bitter pill because he would say, I want you to be successful, and you can't be successful with what you're doing.
But sometimes
and here's
you need
all
to
the
hear
reasons
that.
why, right? And I think one of the great benefits of his efforts was just that he saw so much. And somebody would say, I've got this great idea. And he's like, I've seen that 7 times and it failed every time,
Right.
And you'd have those heart-to-hearts,
right.
And always encourage that person to join us for a beer, It's like,
But he also had a very interesting idea of how much he would invest, which you sort of have indoctrinated as part of your thesis.
That's right. And so my thesis on startups, I said I would never take more than 10% of a firm, but on startups I'd take very small, less than 5%, and that came directly out of Paul's thesis.
Right, because you said that he'll do 25,000 early and first, right, around that. So that then
I would say he'll put some money in early, and with the idea that as the company succeeds and grows, he wants the opportunity to put more money in, right? And that initial investment kind of gives him a seat at the table for future rounds of investment.
Right.
And that's what I took from him. It's, bet on the people that you believe in, get a seat at the table, leave them alone unless they ask for your help,
right.
And see what happens. And then always keep some powder dry, keep a majority of your fund available for future investment as these companies grow
and they meet more milestones or achieve.
Well, yeah, it's all together, right? And as they're growing, they're meeting milestones. That has less to do with proving something to us. It's just a matter of we're seeing the opportunity, right? And the opportunity grows, and we want to get in again.
So when you traveled with him to cities, I mean, some were large cities, some were smaller than Fort Wayne, some were the size of Fort Wayne.
Yeah.
What were some of the things that you saw that you then felt you could bring back to Fort Wayne to either consider or look at the types of companies or best practices for entrepreneurs? What was your big takeaways?
What I saw was the communities they're on a similar arc for the most part. And we talked earlier about this idea of communities are pushing resources to entrepreneurship and startup stuff, and
but maybe not in the right ways.
But I don't know that the arc is right. I
Meaning the
follow
arc.
them.
What do you mean by the arc?
So they're on some pathway, right?
Okay.
And so we could say, well, they're on this path, and we could go to, I'm not going to call it individual cities. I'll say, this city, and say, well, they're 2 years behind where, Fort Wayne. I remember when this, and this happened in Fort Wayne. They're 2 years behind, and someone else might be 2 years ahead.
Right.
But I'm not sure they're on the right path. Right? And because I haven't seen the head of the path, the one thing that I was looking for was, what are the entrepreneurial support organizations that are demonstrating success for their members and also demonstrating success for themselves, meaning they're not totally reliant on taxpayer money or corporate sponsorships, right? If this works, I think it defies itself to teach entrepreneurship in a not-for-profit way.
Right, because don't you think that one of the fundamental flaws is that in these entities that are supposedly teaching entrepreneurism and stuff, they don't take a stake in any of these companies.
Well, I don't know that that's necessarily wrong. I just think
that would be a way for them to generate.
That could be a way for them to generate, and some of them do that.
Okay.
But I think just the whole idea being, if you're delivering the services that have value, you can charge for those services.
Right.
If the services always have to be free, which means they have to be funded by somebody else, taxpayers or generous corporations, then they're probably not. They're not delivering. They're not proving the value, right? They're not delivering the value that they need to.
Well, you also said if a startup or a company doesn't make money, it's failed. I mean, that's right.
Kind of by definition, right? And we say entrepreneurship, in the definition that I always use, is that it's venture creation for value with risk. And that value doesn't have to be money, right?
Right, it could be social good, it could be,
Exactly. But if it doesn't meet, if it's not creating value after some amount of time, then it's failed.
Right.
Okay? And I think that risk element is imperative. Right, and I think it's imperative that the founders share in that risk.
Right, you want everybody to have sweat equity, sweat in the game. So tell me, why do you not like Shark Tank? Don't you think that's
some
helped
in-depth research on me?
Don't you think that's helped the people get
No,
interest
because it creates all kinds of unrealistic expectations, and I think what you see is not what happens in a real. No. And in fact,
if you read the small print at the end, there's all these other things.
That, right? And so and again, when I was traveling with Paul and we would sit at the table, we weren't sitting there after a 5-minute interview with somebody saying, I'll take 20% of your business for $200,000.
Right.
I mean, that's it's a ridiculous conversation. Everything that we were doing was designed to choose those people that we would talk to again.
Okay.
And that's really what happens.
Right.
And so Shark Tank is this completely false.
It's like a reality show.
It's a depiction, but it's not real. It's
not real. It's like a scripted reality show, I guess.
And the companies that go out there and present, and the other thing that we've done is create this environment where this is what a pitch should look like. Right. And so now and there's flashing lights and fireworks and all. Like, I'm sorry, I'm a little more pragmatic than that. Show me how I'm going to get my money back and how I might make a few dollars.
I just did this. It was like a fast pitch.
Right.
You only have 3 minutes and you can only have 3 slides.
Right.
Like, that's it. And then the idea is then that they want to ask you questions or meet with you again.
Yes.
That's the whole idea.
Right. And so that's why I don't like Shark Tank. And that's, and that was always our joke on tour was just, Shark Tank's not real.
Right. Right. But so you've done a lot, and now you're sort of pivoting and thinking about what you're going to do. If you had to share 3 life lessons or experiences with somebody, an entrepreneur, somebody wants to start up a business, what would they be?
So my number one rule of business that I developed a long time ago and has always held true is there's no good deal with bad partners.
Right, okay.
And you get to define what makes somebody a bad partner, but there's no good deal to be had. And I think some of that goes back to that idea of the jockey or the horse.
Right.
Because sometimes there's that deal you think, oh, I really wish I could get my hands on it. But that individual is not going to be a good partner.
And you have to look at it like a marriage.
It's worse than a marriage, right? There's a mechanism for getting out of a marriage.
Right.
There is no mechanism for getting out of a partnership.
Hopefully in your contract you do, but yeah.
Well, yeah. And so I think, that's important. I think that self-awareness is probably the most valuable skill set, and it's one of the things that I look for in someone. And, it often exhibits itself as confidence, but then is it confidence or is it arrogance? And, what's the meat behind that confidence? And so when it's based in self-awareness, I think, those are people that you can probably rely on, right? Because these are individuals who understand their strengths and equally understand their weakness, and they're willing to address their weakness.
Right. I would say it's self-awareness of being able to put their ego aside. They're aware of that this is not ego-driven.
Well, I think something that's really interesting to me is and it kind of goes back to the research side too, and that self-efficacy point of that is that somebody like I can't play the piano. I don't view that as a personal deficit. It doesn't bother me in the least. If someone says, will you sit down and play the piano, I simply say I can't, right? And yet there are people who think they should be able to do everything in their business. And you say, well, why do you think you should be able to do that? Why do you think you should be an expert at that? And especially when I work with distress companies, I say, why do you think you should be an expert in distress? You've successfully run your business for 20 years. You've never been in this position.
Right.
That's why you hire me. Hiring me is a smart decision, right? It's just a matter of using the resources that are available.
Well, they say if you're the smartest one in the room, you're in the wrong room. And you want to surround yourself with the best experts to help you. So, well, I thank you. And at the end of each And Good Company program, I ask guests the same 12 questions that 12 for a dozen, that French novelist Marcel Proust popularized from a Victorian parlor game. And Proust believed that by answering these questions, you're going to reveal your true nature.
Oh, boy.
So, what is your favorite word?
My favorite word is probably no.
Your favorite word? That's interesting. Huh. What is your least favorite word?
Hate, I think, is probably my least favorite word.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
I just like to be challenged in any of those arenas, yeah.
What turns you off creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Mediocrity.
What sound or noise do you love?
I love the sound of a screen door closing.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Car horns.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I'd like to be a musician.
What profession would you not like to do?
Anything in the medical field.
What do you consider your greatest achievement?
My children.
Who, living or dead, would you most like to have a conversation with?
Abraham Lincoln.
How would you like to die?
Quickly.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Well done.
Well, I want to thank you, and it was well done to have you here at the table. I really enjoyed the conversation,
well, thanks for having me.
I think it was really interesting, your perspectives, and I like your different theses. You should definitely write them down so other people can read them. And I hope you'll come back when we can continue to talk.
Anytime, absolutely.
So I appreciate it. And please join me next time when you can again enjoy a seat at the table for great conversation and good company.